Could you now answer any questions, please?
Mr. Zarifa.
Mr. McCarthy, just on that last point about the earthquake-prone policy, is that an example of, I think we talked about it briefly yesterday, that a building owner wasn't required under the policy to do any structural strengthening unless there was a significant alteration to the premises, or if the proposed alterations or work were more than 25% of the value of the building? Is that right?
Could you clarify for me which work you're talking about, please?
Well, I was just thinking of para 24 in your brief where you talk about this new kitchen facility that was proposed in 2009.
Yes.
So my understanding from what you say is that because it was less than 25% of the value of the building, it didn't require any structural strengthening then?
That's correct.
So that was one of the markers, if you like, of the policy coming into effect in terms of requiring structural strengthening.
That's correct. Either that or a structural upgrade of the building would have triggered a requirement to go to at least the target level of 67%, which more recently we've established.
When you say a structural upgrade, what if the owners wanted to do a structural upgrade?
If they wanted to do structural work on the building, that would have triggered a requirement to upgrade the building.
Right, and that would be a significant alteration, presumably, wouldn't it?
Yes.
And you said in paragraph 22 that, or implied that it was a heritage building. Is it because I think in a reply from one of the owners said the heritage status had been lifted some time ago?
Yes, I'm a little unsure about that, but it was previously, I understand, a Heritage 4 building, but that appears not to have been not to be the case now.
Okay.
Well, it's not now, but what was it in September last year?
I'm a little unsure of that. The answer to that, sir.
And is that because the records are unclear, or you're just not sure?
I haven't checked that issue.
Okay. You said that the Becker reports of was it 10 and 15 September weren't on the council file. The two earlier ones were, but not those two. That's paragraph 11.
Yes.
In the Becker information says that they forwarded them to civil defence, hand delivered them, and I'm just wondering whether it's not that significant in this case, but did that highlight any difficulty in other cases with records or communication of things like that post September? Just thinking of this lessons to be learned.
There was certainly the magnitude of this event was such that there was a flood of information coming in, which we geared up to. By the end, we had about 50 administration staff just entering these things. But at the time, we may have been a bit under-resourced. Right.
Perhaps that's something the council can address in the assessment hearing.
Yes.
As a general point. Okay. The only other thing I wanted to ask you about was in the letter that Becker sent to the Commission or to myself 25 November 2011 and in response to a question that I'd asked, which was how you're finding that the building has a lateral load capacity of 11% new building standard related to the issue of whether the building was safe to occupy or safe to the public. That was my question. And what I wanted to get comment on was the reply, or the first part of the reply, said it is important to note that the CCC, the Christchurch City Council policy in operation at the time, was largely concerned with identifying and addressing damage levels. In other words, what impact any damage may have had on the underlying strength of the building rather than the estimated lateral load resistance of buildings. That is what the strength of the building was prior to the earthquake, which may well have been low. For example, the placard system is primarily concerned with observed damage rather than assessed lateral load capacity. Have you got any comment about that in terms of the Christchurch City Council policy at that time?
Clearly, the focus for us with our level 1 and level 2 assessments, if indeed a level 2 assessment occurred, was to assess immediate hazards and to act upon those. It wasn't possible to assess the underlying strength of a building in the time we had available.
Right. And in your experience post-September, did the use of level 1 and level 2, did it carry on beyond the emergency period and beyond the BRO office that was set up?
It was used as an indication of observable damage, yes.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Elliott.
Your Honour. Mr. McCarthy, just show you one document today, BUI COL 617-625.0007.2. This appears to be a seismic risk survey for this building, 617 Colombo Street, which
yes,
you say relates to the whole building.
Yes.
And that was carried out on the 28th of November 1991.
Yes.
And you see down the bottom of the document a hazard identified as being parapet and cornice. And then there's some notes about that in the bottom left-hand corner.
Yes.
And then in the bottom right-hand corner, the building's been given a category A. And I'm right in saying that for that categorisation, the recommended action was immediate action under Section 301A of the Municipal Corporations Act. Is that right?
Yes.
Are you aware of whether any action was taken about that hazard?
Well, I don't think it would have been in 1991, Mr. McCarthy, would it?
No, I don't believe it was, sir, but the record indicates that the discussions with the owners resulted in the commencement of strengthening work in 1994.
I see. So I was going to ask.
I hope we're not at cross purposes. My point was simply that the Municipal Corporations Act ceased to exist in 1974. Didn't it?
It did, sir, and it was taken over by the Local Government
Yes.
Act. Yes.
Some other provision to similar effect.
To what?
To similar effect.
Yes.
Sorry,
Thank you,
Mr. Elliott.
thank you, Your Honour. That might confirm what you were saying yesterday, Mr. McCarthy, which is that these forms had been around for quite some time, as at 1991, in that they were referring to an act which, by that time, no longer applied.
That's correct. There was the Municipal Corporations Act did have a transitional period, I believe, as well. The cessation of that transitional period, I'm a little unsure of.
All right, and so you've said that the strengthening work in 1994 addressed this issue of the parapets, which had been identified back here in 1991.
Mm-hmm.
You might appreciate there is a bit of an issue there that between 1991 and 1994 there appears to have been something which at least one council officer thought would require immediate action.
Yes.
Do you know why that wouldn't have been attended to in that 3-year period?
No, I don't.
Is it possible, you mentioned yesterday that the 1991 Building Act presented some difficulties for the council in taking action about such matters. Is it possible that that was the problem?
It may have contributed. I believe that at that time you had to demonstrate the potential collapse of the building, catastrophic collapse of the building or parts of the building to actually enact the dangerous goods provisions of the dangerous building provisions of that Act. So that's that may have contributed. There doesn't. The immediacy of this work or the requirement for immediate work is not immediately apparent from what I'm reading.
Your Honour, I've spoken to my friend Mr Lang,
Yes.
just arising from Mr McCarthy's reply yesterday about the 1991 Building Act presenting an impediment to the Council.
Yes.
And I've just invited, rather than asking Mr McCarthy, I've just invited that the Council set out to the Commission what it perceived the difficulties were and
Right.
to what extent they were dealt with or not. And I think perhaps not might be the case in the 2004 Act. I think
Yes.
other local authorities provided similar comments to the Commission in the course of that hearing.
Yes.
And I think the Council is yet to
Council
give
is
its
going
position.
to do that for us early next year, I think. So that'll be an issue you follow up on then, Mr Lang, will it?
It's already underway, Your Honour, pleases.
Yes.
That I will be calling some evidence around what was actually done, as opposed to what was ordered to be done from about 1970 onwards. But I'll also be addressing that in submissions on at some stage as well. So I will have both for you.
Thank you.
questions.
Thank you,
Your
Mr
Honour.
Elliott.
Thank you, Mr McCarthy.
Thank you.
Re-examination, Mr Lang. Thank you, Mr McCarthy. Now, Commissioner Fenwick, Commissioner Carter. Thank you. Yes.
So the next witness or